Hey everyone, hey Paul, how's it going? Aaron, that was a quick join. You came in literally as the stream started. Congratulations on perfect timing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I just closed the door.
Hello to everybody that has joined today. So today we've got like Shri, our special guest, who will take us through Bablefish, and that'll be really interesting. As you can see, like I am in my shed today. It is cold. It's been cold and it is wet. So I'm back out in the cabin. I've got a pretty big jacket on. I've got my hands in my pockets. So you'll probably see less hand gestures from me as we go through today.
I'll make up for those then.
So before we get into a couple of the little announcements that came out this week, maybe Shri, just give us a little bit of an intro on just yourself and what you've been specializing in more recently.
Yeah, Paul. So I'm a Microsoft specialized solution architect. A little known thing about AWS is we are a Microsoft Gold certified partner. So there's a large Microsoft team inside AWS helping customers to run Microsoft workloads great on AWS. So part of that team is to come up with some new solutions, some tools like .NET SDK. Bablefish is one of such things. So I cover APAC, helping partners to build Microsoft practices. I've been with AWS about 5 years, so that's about me.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it's an interesting tool, and I'm looking forward to getting stuck into that. Maybe we'll just hand quickly to Matt. There was a couple of announcements that were worthy of mention this week. We might go into some of those. And by the way, where's everybody else from in the audience today? All of us, I think, including you three, is in Melbourne. But Aaron, I'm not sure. Are you in Melbourne at the moment, or are you traveling around?
I am in Melbourne today. I'm in Sydney tomorrow.
Yep.
Nice Melbourne office, very cool. I go there once every blue moon too. Now that we work from home.
I live in Melbourne, but I spend more time in the Sydney office.
Yep. Cool. Okay. Well, I'll get my screen share working. I was just trying to open things in the background, so bear with me. Let us take a look. Now, I think it's ready.
Yep, we got your screen up.
Perfect. So this one I'm really excited for. So MSK Serverless now supports CloudFormation and Terraform. We have a lot of customers that use EventBridge, SQS, that are AWS native. But we also have a lot of customers that are using Kafka, and they're using our managed version of Kafka, which is MSK. I'm a big proponent, and I think Paul and Aaron both are also, of doing things in the serverless manner. So MSK Serverless is serverless Kafka. You've got Kafka at the ready for serverless applications, I'll let Paul or Aaron add more into that conversation, but like if you're not using SQS and you've got Kafka to manage and use, MSK Serverless is an excellent option there. I actually did not investigate it at all. That's why I'm kind of like, I haven't used it. I don't know what to say too much about it, but I didn't use it because it didn't support CloudFormation. So I saw today it does support CloudFormation, which means that now I'm going to get some Kafka magic happening, I reckon, in the background for some projects. I reckon 5 customers or so that I've worked with in the last couple of months are all interested in MSK Serverless and are using MSK. So I know the demand is out there. And even though I'm a bit of a Kafka noob, I haven't touched it for like 5 years or so. This one here is probably going to be my excuse to get on the bandwagon and play with it. Anything else to add there, Aaron? Paul, I know both of you have probably used it a bit more recently than me as well, like General Kafka.
To be totally honest, like I do actually work with customers. There are a lot of customers using Kafka, but I'm probably more the same as you. Because it's not been supported by CloudFormation, hasn't been involved in a lot of my solutions when I need sort of streaming and queuing. So I'm actually very also keen to see more of this because, as I said, there are a lot of customers using it. So actually getting involved more and understanding Kafka more. I know, Paul, you've had a couple of projects that you've used Kafka.
Yeah, so I've got a number of different customers that have worked through Kafka, and I've also seen some of the more traditional self-hosted people or customers that have worked on Kafka, it's somewhat of like a beast, right? You'd probably want to shift the management of that to some sort of managed service, and when we're thinking about like event-driven platforms and using queues and message queues and distributed messages all over the place, we tend, or I tend to automatically push towards something like SQS, Event Bridge, SNS, like using our really, really cloud native mechanisms. And I know that if in one of our really, really early episodes, we talked about a decision tree on how to handle messages of certain sizes and specific requirements around that. So a decision trees do exist around what sort of mechanism you should use for your message handling. But having serverless means that now, some of that compute and the storage is being broken up and separated in the same way that we start to see the implementation of the serverless of like Redshift and Aurora. It just means that you just got less overhead. Like you need to care a little bit less about your environment. So MSK has been supported by like CloudFormation and CDK, but however, MSK serverless was not supported. And I guess like more and more people are now saying like, well, we kind of want like less and less hands-on. So serverless is a really good option for that as well.
Yep. Cool. I'll jump through the next two. They're very similar to each other. They're extensions to AWS Amazon Personalize. So Amazon Personalize is a really good way to add some machine learning to get recommendations out to your end users. You might be building a shopping site and you might want to recommend similar items to that customer of ones that they've purchased or ones that they've been looking at. You might be doing a movie review site and you're trying to find movies that are similar to what someone's watched beforehand. Personalize is a great service for that. And then Paul and myself, actually, last year, we were experimenting with some of the banks, the idea of using Personalize to provide answers for things that customers might be stuck within, so support cases as well.
Yep.
So using as kind of like a knowledge base in a sense behind the scenes. So
I thought we did it.
We did a demo, yeah.
We
did
an
an
episode on
episode
that as
yeah.
well. Yep.
I'll grab the link and I'll paste it.
Yeah, paste that in. So Personalize.
This is a big deal too.
Yeah,
this is a big deal just because it's not just used in areas of probably the most common one is like what Matt and Paul showed us in a previous episode where they were doing an example for a bank, or on Amazon.com where you get the suggestions of other people also bought this and stuff. But a lot of this type of personalized technology also exists under like solutions where you've got lots of different data from lots of different user inputs. And so this is a big deal in terms of being able to do bulk data set imports, because even we have technologies or projects that I'm working on where you've had to incrementally feed stuff in for personalized, but now you can actually, here's a big bulk data set, bang, there you go, learn from this. Because underneath the hood of personalized, I'm sure we said it in the episode where we talked through Matt and Paul's demo, it uses like graph databasing. So it's using graphs, and that's different to GraphQL. That's actually creating relationships between data types as opposed to the actual data structures themselves. This I won't talk too much more on that. I think it's phenomenal. Like we could go on for hours, but this to me is a big deal, having the ability to bulk import your data sets now to build out those relationships.
Yeah, exactly. And this solves the thing that Paul and I had to do, which was like we were using Faker to generate test data for our labs, right? And we were basically like creating a CSV of all the outputs of the data that we're generating. We were manually uploading the first time into Personalize. And then as we had new users on board and we wanted to show people getting new recommendations, we were making API calls constantly to update the data set for Personalize behind the scenes. So having a bulk import for an API would have saved us a little bit of time and is a much cooler and more scalable mechanism than generating a CSV and then individually kind of like hitting up an API consistently to add additional data so we could see things change in accuracy through a particular life cycle. So this one's exciting. And then the other one's actually Personalize related as well. And it's rules-based promotions and recommendations. So this gives you a little more fine-grained control over what's shown to the end user as well. So this was a cool extension too. Paul, I know you were going to jump in. Was that on the first one or?
No.
No, cool. So, very last thing is not a service that came out, but a really cool blog that I'll repost the link into the chat, and I'll just do that now for everyone. Who likes rum? So, rum is a CloudWatch service that came out, real-time user monitoring, roughly about a year ago, I'd say, if I remember correctly. reInvent 2021, yeah, so roughly a year ago. Rum has a really cool capability in the fact that, you know, if you're developing an application and you have certain things that happen that are unexpected on the client side, Rum can be used as kind of like a solution that allows you to gather insights and analyze them as to what might have happened. So it could be like the user had the app crash, and you could then post with CloudWatch Rum the data from that crash back up to AWS. It could be that there was issues with the way that a user navigated through the site and they got like a broken link somewhere. Could be HTTP errors. It could even be like performance side issues where you've trialed your app on a number of devices, but running in a certain web browser, you're getting like very long load times for particular pages, or there's jerkiness to the scrolling, etc. So I really like this blog. I think this is something that we need to explore more of, and maybe we need to do an episode of in the future. Yep. But Amplify Analytics is great for understanding what are users using within the app, how they're navigating through. But a lot of people come to us and say, how do we find out if the app's not performing well at all? And how do we improve that performance? And how do we also understand if people are having problems use the app altogether? So I think CloudWatch Rum is effectively the answer to that.
It's especially important when you've got disconnected apps. Like, it's all well and good for us to trawl through logs on the back end, whether they're like CloudWatch logs on Lambda or whatever they are. You can find the errors that are happening. When errors happen on the front end and they use like something's broken on the front end, and the browser throws an exception, well, we've lost that information. So it's very, very vital to understand that from the front end, we've got effectively like exception handling and exception logging, should I say, on the front end, passing that back. So yeah, awesome stuff. So cool. Let's bring
get into it
to the top and introduce us to the name of a product called Bablefish and what that means for us, Sri. Over to you.
Thanks, Paul. Let's get started with Bablefish. I'll quickly share a slide deck, giving a quick intro into Bablefish, and then let's go into a bit of actual demos so that you guys get a feeling of how to operate on this environment. So let me share the screen first. Share the screen, share screen.
Because I guess like while we're setting up, one of the first things that I think about, and I know that in my career, I would say the first good 10 years, I operated primarily on SQL Server. So that was the environment that I was operating on. And, I spent a ton of time working with it. So I'm guessing you being a Microsoft specialist, Bablefish, got something to do with that.
I was a MySQL guy making a backend for PHP and SQLite on mobile. Aaron, while we're loading up. Yeah.
I was a hitchhiker in the galaxy, and I would use my Bablefish to understand what every other species was saying. Oh, sorry, that was a book that I was reading, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
You brought the right topic. In fact, the name Bablefish came from Hitchhiker's Guide to Galaxy, because this is kind of doing translation. That's where the name came from. So you guys hit the nail at the right point.
Well, that was pretty good.
So why we created Bablefish? It turned out Microsoft SQL Server is very, very expensive. So every time when you run SQL Server, it could be on EC2, or it could be even in Azure, right, or on premises. This is just the AWS numbers. So the licensing cost alone of running a SQL Server instance on AWS is about 70%. Now, if you look at database, it used to be kind of a luxury, but no longer the case. I mean, you have a lot of open source products that you can use as a relational database. The Babelfish is created mainly to avoid this pain the customer is going through and to reduce their licensing fees, and also help the customer move easily to more open source technologies. So in this modernization path, there's a kind of a pattern I see across all the customers when they go through this process. Usually what they first do is they upgrade if they are running legacy .NET framework. Say, let's say they are running something like .NET 4.5, 4.6. They upgrade it into the latest version. And then what they do is they move the code into .NET Core. The reason for this shift, this actually came somewhere in 2019. The reason for this .NET Core migrations came because Microsoft officially announced that .NET Full Framework that works only on Windows is going to, 4.8 is going to be the last .NET Full Framework. So there won't be any new features or upgrades coming into .NET 4.8, and over time it will be sunset. And across the board in Australia, in all the other countries, if it is a greenfield project, it's always built on .NET Core.
Yep.
And now you have partners building whole practice around migrating this legacy .NET Full Framework into .NET Core. So if you are kind of an entrepreneurial guy, want to spin up your own business, so there's a good opportunity here. Like there's a huge wave of applications that's migrating in from .NET Full Framework into .NET Core. So this is something that
anyone on the stream actually, like out of interest, using .NET Core and doing using .NET and doing this migration to .NET Core. Yeah, I was about to say Aaron, definitely you, but let's see on the chat as well if anyone's got .NET experience here. Sorry, Shrew. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been fortunate. So many of my customers are just building greenfield, like more recently, and they are picking, like a lot of them will go and they'll say, yeah, we still want to build on .NET. We're a .NET house, but we're building everything on .NET Core so that we can deploy on Linux and a lighter touch framework.
So is there a difference here? Because like from my understanding, being a .NET programmer, .NET Core is no longer, like .NET Core was one stream while there was still .NET Framework, but everything has come together in .NET 4. So .NET 4 is .NET Core and Framework, combined.
So there's a standard libraries that you can easily migrate without any big changes, but there are some fundamental differences how they work. Especially .NET Core does not depend on Windows APIs. So it's more portable. You can run it across Mac, Linux, and all the other platforms.
My understanding was slightly different. It was more that .NET 4 is now .NET Core. So because it went to .NET Core 2 and 3, and then now .NET 4 is .NET Core, and there's no longer .NET Framework. Maybe
Correct.
I'm wrong, but
starting from .NET 5, I guess there's nothing called .NET Full Framework now. You are right.
So cool.
They're going to be only one version. This is Microsoft officially did this one to avoid any confusion. And they also want
so that starts at .NET 5.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm confused around version numbers, but that's so .NET 5 is .NET Core. And anyway, sorry, continue.
That will be the main branch moving forward, right? And so what happens after this is then the customers start thinking about, hey, how can I get rid of my databases if it is using any licensing product like Oracle or SQL Server. Especially for SaaS-related customers, you see like a lot of products getting built to make it more multi-tenant friendly. So if you talk to like an ISV kind of a customers, like recently, like there are a lot of ISV customers in Australia, for example. The topic is, usually their concerns are, how can I reduce per tenant cost, right? And some of these are B2B applications where you deploy an entire infrastructure for per customer. So you want to have some reduced cost per tenant so that they can change their pricing plans and they can do like all the creative business deals. And for them, it's very important they move into Graviton processors. That's where you get most of the cost savings. Recently, I was like a couple of months ago, not recently, we were having a chat with an ISV customer. It's in fact ASX listed company. And what they were saying, we need it really cheap. Like the solution has to be really cheap. So to make it really cheap, you need to go for Graviton processors. And to go into Graviton processors, you need to have your application running on Linux or .NET Core, right? So we see this trend, and that's why like all these cool tools like Babelfish coming into picture. So going into the reasons why I created this. So let's say you have a SQL Server application. This may be like a simple web application, and it's connected to a SQL endpoint. So previously, when you try to migrate this database, so let's say you want to migrate from this SQL Server into Aura to cost savings purpose, you had some tools like, for example, schema conversion tool to convert the schema from SQL Server into Aura or Postgres or MySQL, you name it. And to migrate the data, you can use a tool like Database Migration Service, or sometimes it's just exporting into an XML or CSV and then importing them, or like creating some kind of a batch loading process. So this migration is pretty straightforward. You have tools to do that. The challenge came when you try to migrate the application code, because you need to now change all the classes, the code that you wrote for that. You need to change the drivers. And there's a lot of developer time involved in that. Usually these are monolithic applications. And the customer is asking, why should I go through this pain of doing this migration? So what we then decided was, hey, there's some kind of a protocol that you have here, right? Somebody's communicating some SQL protocol. Why don't we hack around with that? And Microsoft has proper documentation around that, so it's not even a hack. So let's make this application understand. Let's make Aura understand what SQL Server applications are talking. So that's why we created this kind of special technology that can understand SQL Server commands and then make it work on Aura. And that technology is called Bubblefish. So the whole idea of Bablefish is to make sure that you can keep using your existing queries, your same classes, your same drivers, and all what you need to do is to migrate the database, and the application code will work. It will help you to accelerate your migrations and also do some clever architecture. I'll give you some examples, cool things you can do with this. It's not just migrations, but also some ways that you can reduce database spending. So it's available as an open source project on GitHub. So it's pretty much available for anyone. It's not only available on Aura, Postgres on Amazon, you can even use this one on your on-premises environment. So for example, you don't want to deal with AWS, you just want to run your Postgres clusters in your on-premises environment, you can still use it using this open source solution. So when we decide this Babelfish, there are a few things, a few design tenets we used. One is that we will not compromise on the correctness of the application, because there are some technological impedance mismatch. Like, for example, there may be some data types missing in Postgres, like fundamental differences. So if there's some issue and we cannot handle your query, worst case, we'll throw an error rather than saving your data incorrectly or making transactional non-transactions. So if there's an issue that we cannot handle, we throw an exception and you can handle it in your application. You also get wire protocol compatibility. The idea there being we don't want you to change your class libraries, your drivers. It should work from the wire protocol level, right?
So no need to recompile your application, right? Like you just provided a new an endpoint and it should work.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. The other thing is that once you have this in place, we want you to seamlessly move in between Postgres and SQL. So you can actually query both databases if you want. I will show you how it works in a demo shortly. So how this works behind the scene is when you click a checkbox on Aura when you start an instance, and it will create an endpoint. So the Postgres is the one normally you see, so that's not working. When you enable Babelfish, it creates another endpoint, and you just point your application into that endpoint, and it will start working. Let's go for a quick demo to give you an idea around how this puppy works. Any questions, guys? If you have, feel free to ask them.
My question's probably more around like if your SQL Server has like stored procedures and other things running in the background, how cleanly does that come across with Babelfish? Are there any things that you need to worry about there, or it's just kind of magic?
Pretty good. They work they work really good. Of course, we are like releasing new versions of Babelfish frequently, and over time you will get more compatibility. The good thing is there is a tool called Bubblefish Compass. I'll give a quick demo of that. And using that, you can check whether there's incompatibility of your database when you try to migrate into Babelfish. Right? Cool. I can actually show you some examples of that.
Do you I would like to see, like, do you have an example of a SQL that had a stored procedure that you've migrated into Postgres?
Yes, we do.
Awesome.
Sweet.
You're right. No. I was just going to say the only reason I asked that is I've got a customer who has a SQL database with 900 stored procedures, and they actually want to migrate to Postgres. So that might be very helpful.
Yeah, and me thinking of like the old school database that I used at my like a couple of jobs ago was all Microsoft SQL Server, and it had like a billion jobs running in the background, like millions of like stored procedures. It was like crazy. I'm exaggerating the numbers, but like it scared me as a developer. I was like, I'm not going to go anywhere near this database if I can help it, but I still needed to.
I'm not exaggerating. That's actually 900 stored procedures legit. So, and I don't want to go through them one by one.
That probably raises a controversial topic, stored procs or not. Like, I've never been a fan of stored procedures. I think that anything that's doing some type of logic should be in your code. But that's a story for another day because we know it exists out there.
These scales can be crazy. For example, the previous company that I work for, it's a Microsoft shop, and they had about 2,000 SQL instances, about 20,000 databases, like all crazy applications. And one of the application that I was dealt with, it has accumulated so much technical debt. There was one stored procedure, right? Yeah, once you, there was an error in that. It was slow, so we were trying to figure it out. Once you print it, it's roughly around like 24 A4 pages. Nobody knows what the happening inside that.
Yeah.
Right? Like really, like you have no clue like what's happening there, right? So yeah, it can get sometimes very complicated in these applications. So when you like create this Aurora Postgres or similar, like you select what the Aurora is, you can have a filter here, and then you say show. You need to of course select Postgres version. So it's only at the moment supporting only Postgres. Postgres is kind of the database. It has already now replaced MySQL. I feel like not to do. Yeah. So you can apply this filter here. Show me the version that supports Babelfish, and then you can select the Postgres version. Once you create a one, all what you need to do, only difference between a typical Aurora database and a Babelfish enabled one is to check this checkbox, turn on Babelfish, just a checkbox, right? And you create the database cluster. Once you do that, you will have, so I have like created some clusters already. You will get, of course, a writer reader endpoints. And if you select this, you will see that you can see that there's two ports, one for Postgres, one for SQL Server. So when you direct your application, let's say something written on .NET for SQL Server, you just use the same URL, DNS name, but with a different port. Right? Okay. And that's how you connect into this. So what's the end user experience looks like? You can use your familiar tools like, now this is SQL Server Management Studio. Because we have via protocol level compatibility, you can use most of these tools. Connecting is also similar. You just punch in the names, SQL Server names, and you connect it. And so this is Microsoft tool used for SQL database. And you can see some of the features are not available. Like, for example, in Babelfish or Postgres, you don't have a concept called always on availability groups. right? So if you try to like access this part, of course it will throw an error, right? But you can get all the access to things like the databases. You can view the tables, views, right? So this object browser is not usually like fully compatible with Postgres, but usually you can still use this query window to query into this, right? So let's close this one for the moment. So how does this work behind the scene? So I'm now connected into Aurora Postgres, so I can make a new query. So let's create a database. Create database. Let's create a one. I have a few scripts that I created here.
While you're creating that, I just had a thought. So a lot of the older .NET Framework applications that I've worked on use the ODBC driver for making a connection. I'm assuming that when you say it supports many over-the-wire protocols, that it definitely includes the ODBC protocol.
Of course, definitely.
Yeah, perfect. Because not so much always in .NET Core, but in .NET Framework, absolutely. Like migrating off of ODBC onto something else is often a challenge.
Yeah,
it would probably work even if it wasn't like, it doesn't need to be a .NET application, right? It could be any application that is expecting that
uses the protocol.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. So
question, just to throw one out there. What about JDBC?
It still work as long as so JDBC behind the scene also is still going to communicate with the SQL protocol, right? Microsoft SQL TDS protocol.
So that really means that it can integrate with Java apps as well.
Of course, exactly.
Perfect.
So let's say we so I'm going to run this query, right? And when you do that, so this is what happens on my so this is a TSQL, Microsoft TSQL command I send, right? It got translated, it got interpreted by Babelfish, and behind the scene, what you will find is now I'm connected to the Aurora endpoint, Postgres endpoint, and behind the scene, it has one database. Now this is a Postgres database called Babelfish_DB. So your databases, all what you are creating inside using Babelfish, get created inside this Babelfish DB. So this is what happens behind the scenes. So if I refresh this, you will see that my Div block DB is created. Now this is the Postgres view of that. Now, of course, I create the database, just no any tables. So let's create some tables and other assets like that, right? So
can you zoom in a little bit? It's a bit hard to read the tree. If you can't, that's all right.
Yeah, that'd probably be because it looks like a remote desktop client with the resolution set.
Yeah, this is remote desktop client.
Let's just battle through it. I think it'll probably take some fiddling around. So
yeah, all good. Don't stress.
The other option is to increase the display settings resolution in Windows to be like 150. So
but we don't want to make it
can you do
too
it
difficult for him to work in.
It might mess up.
Yeah,
it might mess
don't mess it up midstream.
Cool.
No worries. Anyway, like just ignore this tree. I'll go show you some examples of. So I'm going to now open a bunch of. Where's this screen? Yeah. Sorry about this.
Notepad not happy with you today?
Yeah.
I remember the days of using Notepad++.
Yeah, so there's a bunch of like tables I'm going to create, right? And when I create it, execute it, this is normal. This is running all the Microsoft TSQL commands here. And it get created inside this Postgres database. If you refresh this, you can see that all those tables and things like get created, right? So there are cool things you can do. Let me show. There's a shrink demo I created for you guys to save the time. So let me play that demo so that you can see all the potential things you can do with this. Let's stop sharing. Share. I can share a video file, right?
Yep, we tried that the other day.
Yeah.
I still use Notepad++ too if I'm on a Windows machine.
Yeah.
And usually if I'm doing something on Windows, it's probably something on some sort of server or some specific Windows demo. And I don't have a Windows computer, so I would use a Amazon Workspace. So I'd be setting it up. So I wouldn't go and install like VS Code or any one of the IDs.
I have Notepad++ installed on my Windows machine, but since VS Code, I just kind of use that for everything.
Yep.
I took a while. I was a Sublime guy because I was supporting local Australians. I used Notepad++, and then I moved to Sublime, and then people have kind of like slowly strung me along to VS Code land. Although I mixed it up with JetBrains.
I did.
Yeah.
I did use Sublime for a while, but then I went to one of my old friends showed me E. It was like another text browser. Then I went to Notepad++, and then I've never gone back since VS Code.
I did try and use Eclipse, but it wouldn't open up my laptop at the time 10 years ago without like the laptop blue screening. Yep. I had bad experience. Yep. Sorry, Shri, we're distracting.
Shri, we've got your video up. Do you want to talk about that, or do we want to mute the sound on the video?
Wait, my browser is doing. Okay, so I'll play it and I'll live dub this video.
Perfect.
So I'm open this my SQL Server Management Studio. So if you search things like version, right? Because now this is connected into Babelfish endpoint, what you are getting is this Bablefish Aurora Postgres SQL Server. So there are subtle differences. For example, if you run the same command in SQL Server, it will be like, hey, this is SQL Server, right? That's the version that you're going to get. So what I'm going to do now is to create a table and then insert a bunch of rows. So these are all written in Microsoft TSQL language, right? You run this command. Of course, it's successfully inserted, and I'm going to insert these values. So if there is, the data types, for example, they get mapped correctly. For example, certain money data type in Microsoft SQL Server has precision of 4 decimal places. In Postgres, it's 2 decimal places. So it will do the right mapping to the right data types, maybe to float when you do these translations. So if you select here, like all the values that I inserted before, so if you select version here, then it will return a value like, hey, Postgres running on Linux. So this is I'm now connected into the Postgres endpoint. So you can select all the values from the table. You get, let's say, all the products, order by price. Now this is Postgres SQL that I'm writing, right? So you can work in the both languages if you want. You can see that the values that you inserted, you are getting here, right? So this is a simple thing, right? What about some more advanced things like triggers or transactions? So I'll give you a quick demo on this. Let's remove this. So here what I'm going to do is to create a trigger so that when you update the table, what it does is it's going to select the value that you inserted and then return those values. Very simple trigger. So let's create this trigger. Now this is written in Microsoft TSQL, right? So you don't need to change all your scripts to suit Babelfish. So behind the scene, it gets mapped into Postgres equivalent trigger. So let's now do an update. I'm going to set price equal, let's say price +1. And where the product ID is some number. And when you do this, of course, the trigger is going to get triggered and it will return the updated values.
I feel like this is going to the shops. I feel like this is how it works when I go food shopping these days. It's like the price today is going to be the price +1.
Yes, with inflation,
for what Paul was saying earlier around having your logic in the application and not needing stored procedures, this is actually an actual example of when I would use a stored procedure. When you've got data, like database level data coming in and changes on a table, which might be a time series or incremental change, and you might have like a coalesced version, or like a view of that data. You might have a trigger exactly firing off a stored procedure, which goes and pulls some records and updates another table. I wouldn't handle that in the application. That I would handle in the database.
No,
but
doing that, Aaron. You should be pushing all of those events off to some other services handling that for you. You shouldn't have the database be doing that.
I think there is a good argument on both sides, and I think we should definitely have an episode on this.
That's why I said we should leave it for another day.
Yeah, I'm on the camp of agreeing with Aaron here. There are things that the database should be doing that are heavy lifting and purpose made and well designed for databases. But I do think that like we over index on what we're using as stored procedures and triggers, and rely on the database to do that when it should sometimes sit app side.
Application level logic should never be a stored procedure. But let's have another episode.
Shree's entering the battle now. Go Shree.
Yeah, that's a really good comment here. Like especially for production databases in large banks, most of the features that the SQL Server offers are disabled. Like I do remember, for example, you can even run .NET code inside SQL Server, but the bank decided that I worked before. Hey, this is too much attack area. Let's disable it completely. So some of the incompatibilities that you will find in Babelfish are sometimes actually not being used in real life production environment. So triggers is very rarely used. It also depends on the kind of developer shop. For example, if the senior developer use this once in the application, all the others usually tend to copy paste it. I do remember, like we do. I did an analysis around what kind of features are the developers actually using on SQL. We ran some queries, extracted some schemas just to check what they are doing with these databases, because we have been upgrading to newer versions, to newer technologies, and we want to check whether they were actually using these SQL Server features. And it turned out, I was managing about 100 plus application portfolio. It's the same code that get repeated again and again and again and again across multiple applications. And maybe some Stack Overflow article that they use to like copy paste, and it's the same thing that get repeated. So anyway, let's go into the story here.
Yeah, I think also that Babelfish is designed to support pre-existing applications, right?
Yeah.
So when you've got a pre-existing application, it's a moot point, right? It's there and it needs to be supported, and that's all that matters. If you want to do something really fancy with that only the Postgres implementation supported, well, you can go ahead and connect to the Postgres implementation and move forward in that way.
Yeah. So here's the Postgres one. Of course, now I'm getting that data that I updated with the trigger. So let's go back into do some more other crazy things like creating transactions. So in SQL Server, this transaction count gives you the number of transactions running at given point in time. So if you start a new transaction and then print this transaction value, this transaction count will increment, right? So there are how many, like 3 nested transactions here. So what I'm going to do is to start few transactions and then roll back the transaction. And when you do that, you will see that the transaction count went 0, 1, 2, 3. And when you roll back, it went back to the previous transaction, the outermost one. So the transactions are also working as expected on Babelfish. Now, this is running on Babelfish behind the scene, by the way. So going back to the Aaron's question about stored procedures and things like that, right? So let's go into a simple Visual Studio project. So here I have a simple application that I created. It's a WinForm application.
I was going to say any application that uses WinForms is not a simple application.
Yeah. So here you can see the classes I'm using are all Microsoft SQL Server related classes. So if you are coming from a .NET developer background, you can see the system data SQL client is a Microsoft SQL Server client that you use to connect. So I create a connection string, connect that, open the connection, create a command. So I'm selecting all the products, and I write a SQL data reader. Now these classes, these libraries, are all designed to work with SQL Server, right? I execute the reader, and then I'm going to populate a data table and then show it in the data grid. Right? Simple thing. So this worked in SQL Server, but it also works with the Bablefish Aurora endpoint, because you get the wire protocol compatibility, right? You don't need to change classes or libraries. So let's create a more cool things. Let's create a stored procedure. So I'm going to create a stored procedure. It's a very simple one. You take the price and then return all the products less than that price, right? Very simple one. So you can create this similar like using SQL Server Management Studio. And then I'm going to program this button so that whenever I click that, it's going to invoke that stored procedure. Similar code. The only difference is that instead of that select statement, I need to, the command text I'm going to call here is sp get product by price. Command type is going to be stored procedure. Now this is all Microsoft SQL development activities, right? I'm not doing any Postgres development here. It's just using the same code, same process. And I'm going to pass this parameter max price to the stored procedure. I'm going to read it from my text box on my user interface. So there's a text box called max price. I'm converting that string into a decimal number, passing into the stored procedure, and then going to run this. So you put some kind of a price like 10, 100, or you run this press button and you get that stored procedure get executed and it returns all the values. So you get an idea like how this baby works. It's quite easy to use. But the question usually I get is, there are of course certain features that is not working, right? I mean, because of technology impedance mismatch. So the question is, how do you know well in advance before starting the project that what kind of incompatibilities that you can expect when you go through this modernization? So there's a tool called Bubblefish Compass that you can use. Let me share my screen again.
I was going to say, as we transition to that, I'm kind of thinking it's amazing how far we've come, right? Like Windows Forms. I was looking at that. I'm like, I reckon I could replicate like pretty much the functionality within Honeycode these days if I was to use AWS Honeycode. Or if I wanted to be a little more hands-on, it could be Amplify UI. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
But I mean, you can't build a desktop app though, not in Honeycode or Amplify. You could use Swift.
Well, with the work going on with Flutter, which will be like a later session, you can now build desktop apps using components from Amplify, right? Yeah, so Amplify supports through Flutter web and desktop.
Flutter, yeah.
When you use Windows,
for certain use cases.
You can do snap to corners, max screen. Some of the sizing stuff was easier to do when you use some of those tools.
Yeah,
rather than
I just
funny stuff.
When I see WinForms, I smile because I just remember for a while there was a Xamarin, or there was another when Microsoft tried to release the ribbon and you try and program for the ribbon and it was just so difficult. WinForms is easy in comparison.
Xamarin, I remember making mobile apps in, and Shrew, I'll just put your screen back on for everyone. But yeah.
So what you can do, like, hey, let's say you want to do an assessment, right? Put a business case to reduce the cost of your application. So how do you assess it is the question. So a starting point could be using this Bablefish Compass tool. So all what you need to do is to first select whatever the database you need to export. So in this case, I have a .NET Nuke application. I generate the script, So I'm going to export this database, all the tables, views as a script. This is a SQL Server feature. Click next. You save to a script file. You point it to whatever the location you want. Go next. And it's going to generate the schema of your database so that you can create a replication of this database, right? So once you have this file, what you can do is to run this Bubblefish Compass tool and then say, hey, analyze this database. So it's just a command line utility. You just punch like this, and it's going to go through all the Microsoft TSQL commands and then assess what kind of incompatibilities that you will encounter when you try to run it on Babelfish, because Babelfish is still version 2, right? So it's just about a year ago that we released it. So this is a report you got, and it will give you like what are not supported things, what you need to review manually, what it managed to get it converted. So in this case, let me zoom this one in a bit so you guys can see that. Yeah. Oops, so that's too much zoom. Let's zoom it out. 200 is right, 150. Sorry. So it gives like a summary of this. Hey, there are about 48 not supported features compared to all the other things supported. When it says not supported, don't lose faith. There are some ways that you can fiddle around with and get it working. You can even go to the object level and then view, hey, where this actually happens. For example, you can see that XML data types is not supported in the Postgres. So you may decide to migrate this XML manipulation into your code rather than doing it inside the database, right?
I would second that, and that's to Paul's point. Anything that's manipulating data, like from that point of view, that I would suggest that's your application logic.
Yeah. So things like merge, for example, this is a way that you can quickly do upserts. So for example, if the data exists, then update. If it does not exist, insert value. So there's a shorthand form of upsert in SQL Server called merge. Postgres has that, but in a different form. But you can go into the exact line where this is happening from that report and then look how it is being done. And then, so there's a merge operation here. And you can rewrite this. There's some examples how to do this. So although it says it's not supported, doesn't necessarily mean it's not supported, but you need to write it in a different form, right? So you can get this report that will help you to, for example, assess how complicated this migration is going to look like, right? That's about it. I would like to give you some ways that you can actually learn this Babelfish. The easiest way to learn Babelfish is to go through this Babelfish app modernization workshop. If you guys, I think, can provide your contact details, we can hand over these labs. It's all self-paced. We will give you some free AWS accounts to try them. Within 3 or 4 hours, you can execute all labs and then learn how to do that. Part of this workshop is either I can run it with an instructor or you can do it by yourself. You can run a POC on the spot using Bubblefish Compass and then check how complicated this migration is going to look like. If you want to do some more advanced, let's say, complex application migration and your team is busy and you don't want to do that, you can plug in a partner who can do that. Now, there are a lot of certified partners who can do this. They have done some migrations before. And the good thing is, we have some funding available to do this. So it's not just the tool, but also if you are in a migration path, if you want to create a kind of a POC, just ping Paul or Matt and then say, hey, you are interested in running a POC, and then we can figure it out how this funding available.
And that's the AWS Microsoft team, by the way. Yep.
I got a question, Sri. When I was building on SQL Server, we did a lot of work around ensuring like our queries were, optimized. So I spent a lot of time like looking at the query optimization plan. Like, what happens if you right click and run that? What happens in SQL Server Management Studio where it tells you what's doing and where the missing indexes and so forth? Like, does that go forward, or is that implemented or not?
So that's a really good question. So that query optimization plan works only on SQL Server. But what happens is, let's say you find some slowness in your queries, right? Then you need to use Postgres-based tools to do that optimization.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, like missing indexes, as you said.
Yep.
So it's really just for application migration for existing applications and SQL databases. And then, as I think Paul said it earlier, when you want to start taking advantage of Postgres features, so this in this case, database optimization would be a Postgres feature. So you'd have to go through and start using Postgres. Is that sort of the correct method or way of doing it?
That's the correct approach. Also, like make sure that you before embarking on a Postgres migration, like do a bit of a benchmark your existing application. Not only just to improve the performance in the final after doing the migration, but also to sometimes the business users may say, hey, we need super fast. Okay, but did you have it super fast in your previous application? Sometimes the answer is they're okay with certain pages like loading slow. Or alternatively, you may spend a lot of time optimizing, let's say, a kind of a page that hardly been used. So make sure that you have some analytics around the usage of the application before you embark on any optimization work.
Yeah, I've seen in the past where people will take the Brent Ozar type scripts and sort of run it across their database and like litter their database full of indexes because it was recommended to do it, but haven't really done their due diligence around what they're doing, the size of the files that exist on disk, whether or not you're putting something that needs to be there. The indexes can cause significant slowdown on writes. So, there's a process around what you wanted to do there. I just wasn't sure what would happen if you tried to right-click and did show query execution plan.
There's a really good example. Like once I was building an application, the users were complaining, now it's super slow. Like I should be able to get the report downloaded within 1 minute. When I dig deep into that, what I found was there's an issue with the UI because there was no proper filtering and the users were downloading about 6 million rows every time when they run the report. And when I asked, are you spending your time looking at 6 million rows? The answer is no, right? So what we did was just apply a good filtering in the user interface that reduced the report size.
Yep, that reminds me of like I know we're cutting on time, but I had this application and it had like a data grid. It was a web application. It had a data grid. And the way they implemented the data grid and paging through that data grid was when you would hit the you would hit the page would load, it would bring the whole record set down, which had like, let's just say 1 million rows. It would drop 990 rows and display the 10. When you click next, it went to the database, got all 1 million rows and displayed the next 10. So, thinking about those sorts of things can make significant improvements. And also the stampeding herd effect, right? If you had 20, 30 people using the platform, all trying to pull 1 million rows, you're stressing the database. Once we implemented that properly and we did, I forget the command in SQL Server that enables you to like paginate properly, like using the pagination row over or whatever it's called, pulling down like much smaller subsets of data was massive performance implications on database by thinking about what you're doing properly.
This is why I love a good DBA. I think we've all got examples of that. And then like you have a good DBA that comes in and they go like, what is happening, guys? And and everyone focuses on optimizing their queries. Yep.
That was an awesome session, Sri. I shared a specific page that we can gather your details, and if you want to register there, then Sri can reach out and send you some of that exactly. And great session, like really good to see approaching migrations in a different way, understanding the application might need to be there. You don't want to get rid of it, but you want to save cost. You don't want to go ahead and refactor. Like, refactoring costs a lot of money. And it's just seeing the tools that you can use there. I've used it myself with some existing applications, but also just for fun to like implement the way I like to. I'm probably it's 6 of one, half dozen the other now because I've jumped between it. But going from like select top one in SQL Server to limit one in Postgres or MySQL, jumping between those two things, it's handy and it's an interesting thing, and it doesn't actually cost you any extra to implement that feature as well. Tick the box, it comes on. Just make sure you allow that port to be open in either your NACLs or your security groups.
Cool. And Paul, we have... I know we kind of said MySQL is... most people have moved to Postgres that we've seen. But next week, we actually do touch on MySQL because we've got WordPress and CDK in store, I'm pretty sure.
Yep.
Yeah.
So next week we got Guy. He'll be taking us through how to deploy specific custom versions of WordPress with CDK. It should be really fun. So, yeah, thanks so much, Sri, for coming. Thanks, everybody, for coming along.
Awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
See you all next week.
You're welcome. See you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
See you all.